Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing our Masechet Avodah Zarah, and we are on Daf Chet Amud Bet, the first line, top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned. Zechud Yeshua ben Diana, Yal bat Rivka, Menashe ben Asi. This Amud is also being learned. Leilu Nishmat Zipora bat Yitzchak. We started some interesting Gemara that a person that is invited to the non-Jewish, a pagan festival, not just a communal festival, but even a private party of a wedding. And the Rishonim write, it's not just a wedding, it really is any party, but the derech was, the custom was, Goyim would invite the Jews for their weddings, but not necessarily for other holidays. They recognized that the other holidays would not be aligned necessarily with the faith of the Jewish people. So the derech was that they invited you for the wedding of their children, but really any of the invites will become a same problem. And the Gemara said, therefore the Jews who live in Chutz La'aretz, amongst the Goyim, they're Ovdei Avodah Zarah b'tahara. They're considered serving Avodah Zarah with a good heart, which means they don't realize even that this becomes a problem, because the pasuk is darshaned v'kara lecha v'achalta mizivcho, that from the time of the invite already is considered v'achalta mizivcho, that you're going to be eating from the korbanot, even without eating it. Just from the invite itself is going to be a problem. Now the Gemara says you have to give some sort of timeline. What is considered partying? Imagine if somebody has gotten married last week, so we have Sheva Brachot. So still a party is for the wedding. When you invite someone for Sheva Brachot, so we celebrated 7 days afterwards for a regular Bachur and Betulah. You have 7 days of partying, right? But if you do it like 10 days later, how about 20 days later? Still you're excited for the wedding. Is that considered a problem? Where do you draw the lines? It says the Gemara Hilkach, therefore, Kol Tlatin Yomin, Ben Amar le Machmad Hilula, Ben Lo Amar le Machmad Hilula. Within 30 days, whether the guy tells you, well, I just married off a son, married off a daughter, and here you are, it's the invitation, you're invited to celebrate with us. If he even doesn't tell you that this is because of the wedding, still is considered clear that this is because of Machmat Hilula, and it will be Asur. Amar le Machmat Hilula, if he tells you, well, I just married off a child, and I am celebrating, and come and celebrate with us, then Asur is going to be, the Gemara asks this as a question. Says the Gemara, Kol Tlatin Yomin ben Amar le Machmat Hilula ben Lo Amar le Machmat Hilula Asur. Mikan va'elach, after 30 days, I Amar le Machmat Hilula Asur. If he tells you clearly, I am celebrating the recent marriage of my child, is going to be Asur. If he doesn't tell you, and you know it was more than 30 days ago, and he just invites you stam without explaining that this is because of the wedding, then it will be mutar. Says the Gemara, V'chi amale machmad hilula, and if he tells you that this is because of the wedding, then what's the timeline? Imagine if it's 6 months later. 6 months ago, he married off a child. And now he tells you, says, look, we were in New York, we were partying there because it's now intercontinental marriages and so on and so forth. So we weren't here, and now we're celebrating 6 months later. Is it still Asur? A year later? Where do you draw the line? It says the Gemara, Ad Emat, Amar Rapapa Ad Teresar Yarchishata, until a year. Until a whole full year after the wedding, if he tells you that we are celebrating a post-wedding party because of the marriage of our children, it will be still Asur. So says the Gemara, Umeikara me'emat Asur, Amar Rav Papa Rav Papa says, Mishemed Rava, Mechiramu Sari Be'asinti. When they put their seorim, the barley, to create the food, to create the drink, the alcohol, so on and so forth, that already would become asur because that's a preparation for seudah. So even though that it's not necessarily happened yet, it will become asur. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, the vessel that they had to make shchar, to make beer from, the moment that you put the barley inside to create it, already becomes asur. And Rashi brings another shot that they used to put dirt in certain large vessels, and they would plant in their seorim before the chuppah. They would plant actually grain inside there before the chuppah. This is like sabzeh that they used to have. They would make green things growing out of grains, and that would be beautiful, fresh green, and that would be like a siman for the chatan and kala that they should sprout and should grow, and so on and so forth. So either this is preparation for making shchar, for making beer, for the chatula, or making this greenery to give a siman tov to the chatan and kala that they should sprout and they should be fresh and green. So that would be one of the says the Gemara. Mara says, you just mentioned that if the goy tells you clearly that I'm inviting you because of the recent wedding of my child, then it will be asur up until 12 months, but no more. So says the Gemara, we have a story that contradicts that. Says the Gemara, Rav Yitzchak bar Mesharshia ikla lebe'ahu oved kochavim. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Mesharshia was invited to a goy's house for partying post-wedding, and this was already after 12 months, and this is what happened. So he accepted to go because it was after 12 months. Teres al yarchishata. Veshameh the Odi, and he hears, when he was there in the house of the goy, he hears that the goy started going to his room and bringing the getchka out, the Avodah Zarah, and started bowing down and thanking. Says, thank you that this guy came to my home. Amazing. He was so excited, he started doing Avodah Zarah. And he hears this, Upiresh. He excused himself and he left the house, they left the party. So says the Gemara, Lo achal, he didn't eat anything, because again, this will become zivche betim. So says the Gemara, Shani Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Mesharshia dadam chashufu. Rav Yitzchak bar Mesharshia was a different ball game, because he was a very well-known chacham. He was a tremendous personality in town, and therefore for him to come to this Avodah Zarah's house was considered a real kavod, and the person got very excited and he started doing Avodah Zarah. But a regular person would not create such excitement, so therefore after 12 months it will be mutar, even if the goy tells you that this is a post-celebration for the wedding. So says the Gemara. Now, by the way, we spoke about Kalanda and Starnura. We spoke about these holidays, and it's interesting to note that these are pagan holidays that we are very much familiar with, because the Roman culture and the Western culture, the way we know it now, they're actually very much a continuation of one another. And what we know as Starnura in the time of the Gemara turned into in the Roman culture was called Saturnalia, which was from December 17th for 8 days to December 25th. Right, so you wonder to yourself where December 25th comes from, especially because if you study the historians, the birthday of Yashka was not the December 25th. That's for sure the day that it was not. If you want one day that it for sure was not the birthday of Yeshua HaNotzri, is December 25th. So how did this happen? Aside from the fact that the history is 150 years off, and that the Ramban actually alludes to this in his debate with Pablo Cristiani in Sefer Milchamot Hashem, that's printed in the Kitvei HaRamban, that the history is completely off. It has a whole story behind it, how the Romans actually put this up as a man-made religion in order to create what to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish within the community. But even prior to that, the Christianity used pagan holidays in order to have a common ground when spreading Christianity to other nations, in order to have common ground to try to emotionally have the support of people who they were proselytizing to. And the Starnura, this Saturnalia, was one of the greatest. On the Roman calendar, the greatest day was Saturnalia. And this was like 8 days of partying, gambling. It was a lot of drinking. It was Avodah Zarah for sure, Gilui Arayot of highest level, and there was Shfichut Damim as well. The 8th day they actually had a human sacrifice. It was pretty pagan in that way, and they had to work around how to find common ground. This actually had a lot of clashback from the Christians, the original Christians, and what they did was they said we can't find common ground with pagan like this, so we're going to give significance to the December 25th in a different way to share that common ground, and hence the December 25th was born, right? Pun intended. So that's how it came about, and perhaps the reason that the Jews did not celebrate it or were actually very afraid is a whole thing of actually. There's a Rav that has written many volumes of Sfarim, and he has one on Chanukah. In the back of it, he has an entire kuntris, entire pamphlet on the Netel Nacht and December 25th, the Minhagim of Khatam Sofer and others. Some Jews don't learn that night, and so on. Where does it come from? Because Jews were afraid of going to the streets even. Because if you would be caught, the focus of the Gilui Arayot and the human sacrifice and all of that was historically always on the Jews. Meaning they double dipped on this, and they said, okay, once we have it, we could actually have the oppression and the part of the antagonistic thing against the Jews also was always there. So historically, this became a very difficult day of persecution and so on for the Jewish community. They just stayed home because it was dangerous. The pashut being the streets was not simple. So that's a very interesting historic event behind the day of December 25th. When you look in Saturnalia being we could even really research this. There's a lot of literature written on this, how this turned into December 25th, the way we have it, how the pagan Roman date of Saturnalia turned into Kratzmach and into a Christian holiday. That's an interesting thing, and this is not the only one. There are other holidays in the current Western culture that really the sources of them are pagan sources, including Halloween and so on. So this is all the same attempt of being an equalizer to find common ground in order to be able to spread the newfound religion of Christianity to masses of pagans and pagan cultures. That's something very interesting to keep in mind. And we go on, the Gemara says, Kartasim. What was Kartasim? My Kartasim, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yom Shtafsa Bo Romi Malchut. This was the day that Roman Empire basically got hold of their kingdom. And there was really 2 days, Kartasim. The Tosafot over here says Kartasim is it's broken down to 2 different words, and The first part of it means to grab, to get a hold of, and the second part of it means a second time. So, as the Gemara is going to discuss in just a few lines, this was perhaps the second time that they took hold of a greater level of kingdom, a greater ruling over the world. Says the Gemara, in the name of Shmuel, Yom Shtafsa bo Romi Malchut. This is the day that the Malchut Romi, the Roman Empire, got the power that he had. Vehatanya, says the Gemara, we learned in the Braita, not like that Kartasim is separate from the day that Romans actually started ruling, because the Braita says Kartasim veyom shetafsa bo Romi Malchut. Kartasim and the day that Romans got hold of their kingdom, so which indicates that there are two separate days. It's not one and the same. Kartasim is not the day that they took hold of Malchut, but Kartasim is one, and Yom Shetafsa bo Malchut is a different day. So says the Gemara, correct. Amar Rabbi Yosef, shtet tfisot tafsa Romi. There are two points in time historically that Romans became an empire. First, Achat Bimei Kalpatra Malkata. This was a queen of actually Egypt. She ruled over Alexandria of Mitzrayim. There is Gemara in Masechet Nida, Daf Lamed, that talks about this and so on. So she was an emperor of a massive empire, and the Romans, in their beginning, they had a lot of fights, a lot of wars went between Rome, winning what became Rome afterwards, and Mitzrayim, and it was like stalemate basically. There's no one won, and at some point they were both tired. This is in Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi actually in Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph Al-Chabed, brings this thing. There are slight differences between Bavli and Yerushalmi in this area, but there is a very interesting story brought there that at the end they said whoever the head of the army kills themselves as a suicide by falling on their own sword will be considered winner. And the Roman general, who was the head of the army, right away did not hesitate, put his sword backwards, and he killed himself like that. And Romans basically won that thing. That's how the Yerushalmi puts it. But be that as it may, that's the first time that Roman Empire became a thing. And well, the Gemara there actually says in Yerushalmi that is the basis of Kalandra and Starnura, which doesn't seem to be aligned with our Gemara, but nevertheless, at least the historic story of the first win over the Egyptian Empire is mentioned over there in Yerushalmi, in our Gemara, in Talmud Yerushalmi, in the beginning, says the Gemara, and the other one is, already they were an empire, but they became now like world power by taking over from the Greeks. So what was the story of that? There's a whole story attached to this in the Gemara, which is a very difficult story to understand, but nevertheless, says the Gemara, the second one was in the time of Yevanim, the Chi'ata Ravdimi, Amar, Ravdimi said when he came from Eretz Yisrael, to Latin v'tartin kravi avdi Romaye b'ade Yevanai. The Romans and the Greeks, they had 32 battles to see who is going to win, who is going to take over the other one. And this was not going anywhere, basically. Velo yachlu lehu. They couldn't defeat the world power that the Greeks were. Romans wanted to take over the power as the Roman Empire, what it became afterwards, but they couldn't. They went to battle 32 times, and it was not working. At the Shatfinhu leIsrael Badayu, until they figured, we're going to do this in a different way. You got to use the brains. So we're going to partner up with the Jews, and this is what they did. V'hachi atnu b'hadayu, and they made a pact together with the Jews, and they made a tenai, they made a condition, iminan malchi minayhu hafrechi, and parchi, there will be the king and there will be the government. So if we will have the king, then you will run the government, right? And if the parchi is going to be from us, if we have the government, you have the king. So there are two governing elements of every empire. There will be the king and there will be the government. And the Rome actually had this, the Tosafot in Sanhedrin, Avodah Zarah. The Iran talk about the way the government of Rome was led was with 300 zekenim. The Senate, it was something that was created back then already, that they had the king and they had the Senate. So I'm not sure exactly if this is a reference to that, but there were two elements of Malchut. One was the king, and the other one was the parchi, the leading elements of the government. So they basically made a pact with the Jews, says, look, let's be in this together. If the king is chosen from us, the government would be led by you, and vice versa. So says the Gemara, V'shalchu lehu, and they agreed. And then the Romans sent to the Yevanim as follows. Ad ha'idna avidna bekrava. Until now we were fighting with swords and arrows, but right now, hashta navid bedina. Now let's see who deserves to have the empire. I ask you a question, they said. Margalit ve'even tova. This is, for the diamond dealers in the crowd. This is going to go up the ladder, basically, of value for jewels and diamonds. Margalit ve'even tova ezu mehen yaseh basis lechaviro. If you want to make a jewel from margalit and from Even Tova, which one is more important? Which one is going to be a base for which one? Now, when you have a regular diamond ring, you have gold as the base, and you have the stone as the jewel on top of it. And that would be the case for any jewel that you want to make. If you have two different types, the more important one would be the crowning jewel, and the other one would be considered the base. So Gemara says, Shalchu lehu margalit le'Even Tova. Of course, the margalit is going to be the base, Even Tova is going to be the jewel. Even Tova ve'inach ezu mehen ya'aseh basis. The different gisaot over here. If you have Even Tova and Anach, which one would be base, which one would be the jewel? They sent back, they said, Even Tova will be the base for Anach. So says the Gemara, they sent back again, Anach Sefer Torah, eze mehen ya'aseh basis. If you have Anach and then you have Sefer Torah, this is where it's very interesting, because it seems that the Romans and the Greeks, with all the gezerot that the Greeks, the Rambam writes, the tremendous decrees that they had against learning Torah and so on and so forth, and Israel, and not banning the learning of Torah, but apparently they had this value for the learning at some point in time in the timeline of the history. So says the Gemara, they sense that if you have Sefer Torah, the godly knowledge, the Chokhmat Elokim Chaim, and you have the greatest jewel, which one is more important? And to everybody's surprise, they actually sent back, the Greeks sent back, Anach Sefer Torah, that the jewel, the top jewel, is going to be the basis, the base for the crowning ultimate jewel of the world, which is Sefer Torah. So now that's exactly what they wanted to hear. They sent back the Romans to the Greeks. They said, Imken, if that's correct, if you understand and you agree with us on that, Anan Sefer Tova Gaban ve'Israel Badan. We have made a pact with the Jews. They agree with us, and if you agree that they have to have the melucha, that's most important, we are the ones who are going to be leading the way from here and on. Kafulehu, Esrin, Kafulehu, that means they basically won in that way. It was a difficult, it must have been a difficult situation that this argument won. And says the Gemara, Esrin v'shit shenin kamu lehu behemnutaihu. For 26 years, they were honest to their words towards the Jews, and they led the government together with the Jewish people. With that agreement that they had, the king, the government, the government, the king. Says the Gemara, afterwards, Mikan Va'elach, after 26 years, they started subordinating the Jews under themselves, and then the rest is history. Says the Gemara, Meikara Mai Darush, Ulbasof Mai Darush. Gemara is bothered at this. Just wait a second. It seems like beforehand, they were very much in favor of Torah. They respected the Torah. What happened exactly? And the Gemara says this actually was, the Sefer Torah as a document was something that the Goyim even respected tremendously. So they were coming off the Sefer Torah itself and darshaning different psukim, explaining their actions based on the sources from the Tanakh itself. So the Gemara therefore is bothered. It says, wait a second, what did they think in the beginning that they wanted to make a pact with the Jews, and then what happened afterwards that they broke it? Says the Gemara like this. Meikara darush, nis aven elcha ve'elcha lenegdecha. They went back to the story of Yaakov and Esav. They understood that Jews are from Yaakov and Romans are from Esav, which by itself is not so simple. We're going to speak about that in just a moment. And they said, well, let's go back to the sources. Our forefathers, we are kind of like cousins, far cousins. So our forefathers were brothers. And let's go back to the source, which is Chumash is the source of everything, and see how the relationship should be. And in the beginning, he actually says, Esav tells Yaakov, let us go together. Let us travel together. So that's why they wanted to do this together. Because they saw Esav, their great-grandfather, offered to Yaakov to work together, to travel together. So therefore, they also traveled together. And then, what did they do? At the end, they said, well, what did Yaakov, your great-grandfather, answer to our great-grandfather? He said, no thanks, but no thanks. And he said, Yavor Adoni lifnei avdo. My master should travel in front, ahead of his Eved, his servant. So therefore, you see that we are the ones leading the way, and you're going to be actually our avadim. You're going to be our servants. So that's how they understood the sources in Tanakh, and that's how they acted. Now, this has deeper understandings, of course, of Esav and Yaakov being the source of all interactions in history. You know, they were Gedolei Israel, that whenever they wanted to have community activism and try to stand for rights and to plead on behalf of the Jewish rights and so on in pogroms, in difficult galuts, they would actually study for days before the meeting the story of Yaakov and Esav, understanding that this is in core element is the source of all the interactions between Yaakov and Esav for generations to come. But you really see that from the Gemara also for the other way around. That means the Esav, the Bnei Esav, the Romans, dealing with the Jewish community, they did the same thing, looking at Tanakh, looking at the story of Yaakov and Esav, and deciding how they should make their decisions, right? Now, before we go on, there's something fascinating that if time allows, just at least starting it, you see from here that the Romans themselves believed that they are from descendants of Esav Arasha. And you see this later on as well in the description of the different holidays that they had, that they actually had customs referring to themselves as the continuity of Esav, and to the Jews as the continuity of Yaakov, and they actually had a custom of showing that Yaakov, who cheated Esav in taking away the brachot, taking away the firstborn rights, now he is subordinated to Esav, and kind of like they celebrated that in that way. So you see this not just from here, but from later on as well, that they understood very clearly that they were the continuation of the genealogy and the path of Esav. So how do you know that? And that actually is not so simple, because you're talking about a different place in the world and so on. There are 4 different 4 different ways to really go about this in things that are brought. Of course, Rashi and Chumash already, when the Psukim count Alufei Esav, Rashi says Aluf Magdiel Zoromi. Right? It has Aluf this, Aluf that, Aluf Magdiel. And you take a look at Rashi brings from Chazal, who is Magdiel Zoromi. So there you have already in Rashi, you just learned regular Pashut, Chumash Rashi, and it tells you that Aluf Magdiel ended up developing into what we know as Rome, and that would be one answer to this question of how we knew it. But there's much more that has to be discussed, because on one hand, we say the Gemara says this, and we had this in Masechet Brachot, we discussed it, and we mentioned the Rambam. The Rambam says Sancheriv came and bilbelet kol ha'umot. He switched around every nation to different places of the world, and we don't know where Amalek is. We don't know where the Moabite, the Edomites, and so on and so forth. So how do we know who is where is something very interesting. We got to discuss B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow a fascinating piece on the genealogy of Americans and Europeans as being the continuation of Edom, and perhaps a tshuva from the Yabetz, who discusses whether or not you could accept a European Ger Tzedek, because that would become very questionable, because Ger Edomi, until 3 generations, cannot marry a Jew. So how do we deal with that? It's going to be a fascinating talk, which we're going to have B'ezrat Hashem in the days to come.